My ex-fiance's mother called me in March to ask if I still tune pianos, and I said yes before she finished asking. Nobody in that family ever told me to go, they just stopped. The way a house stops heating a room nobody sleeps in. Not one of them noticed. That's the part I couldn't get past. I didn't say yes to get near Claire. Claire's in Columbus. I'd quit checking a long time back. I've got a tuning lever, a roll of felt mutes, one fork older than I am. I can put anything with strings back into agreement with itself. 2 years and 4 months of nobody calling, I couldn't do a thing about. Nadine Whitaker. Claire's mother, which is what everybody here calls her. That's not a name, that's a job title. I stood on that porch the day I gave the ring back and asked nothing. Do you want me to stop coming by? Am I allowed to call you? What do I do with 5 years of Sundays? She told me once that nobody hears a thing go out of tune. They just stop sitting in the room with it. There's a folded page in the bench of that piano. I saw it the first day. I didn't read it. My name's Elliot Ward. I'm 36. I tune pianos in Marietta, Ohio, and I can hear a fraction of a thing wrong from across a room, which has never once helped me with a person. The piano is a 1952 upright. Front room, north wall, sitting under a window, which is where you should never put one. I opened the lid on a Tuesday. I have never worked slower on anything in my life. There's a church across the street, right across from her front window. A gray sedan sat at the curb in front of it the whole time I was inside. It was there when I went up the steps. It was there when I came down them. Somebody was sitting in it both times. There's a shop in Parkersburg that does this work. 12 miles, across the river. 2 men in a van with the name painted on the door. Ray Whitaker had their card. It was in the kitchen drawer with the spare fuses. She had the number. She called me. On the phone, she made it sound like a chore she'd been putting off. If you're still doing that, if you've got a week sometime this month, she'd rehearsed it. She'd rehearsed it enough that it came out flat, which is how I knew. Nobody in Marietta says her first name. Bev next door calls her Honey. The church bulletin called her Ray's widow for a year and a half. Claire calls her Mom when Claire calls. I'd known that woman 7 years. I'd eaten at her table most Sundays for 5 of them. I carried her husband's casket down those front steps. And I had never once said her name out loud to her face. I work alone. There's the van, a tool roll, a book of invoices with a carbon sheet in it, because half my people are older than the van and they want something to put in a drawer. Church basements, a middle school with 11 pianos and no money for any of them. Ladies out in Devola with spinets nobody's touched since a daughter quit lessons in the 80s. I don't play. People find that out and they get a look. 2 years of lessons when I was 9. My teacher told my mother I had the best ear she'd had in that room and the worst hands. She was right about both. I've made a living out of the half of it I could use. People ask me how I took the breakup. Nobody has ever asked me the other part. When Claire gave the ring back, I didn't lose Claire so much as I lost Sundays. 5 years of them. Gone on a Monday morning. There's a word for what I was to Claire Whitaker. There isn't one that covers knowing where her mother's fuse box is. She had the door open before I was up the steps, gray at the temples, hands that had done 40 years of something. Bev told me she'd been a court stenographer in Athens County. She listened like it. She heard me hear the piano before I got my coat off. The room was cold. The way a room goes cold when the vent's been shut a few winters. Everything in it was clean, a recliner with the footrest down, a magazine on the arm. The piano under the window with a runner on the top. 3 photographs on the runner, none of them turned toward the recliner. I struck the A above middle C. I had it before the note quit. That bad, she said. It wasn't a question. It's flat all the way through, more or less together, which is the only good news in the sentence. And the rest of the sentence. I'll know Friday. 4 years of nobody touching a piano ought to leave it right where you left it. That is not what 4 years does to one. She asked me what happened to it. I said I'd have to turn some pins before I'd be willing to lie to her about it. She said that was the first honest thing anybody had said in that room since October. She brought me coffee. I hadn't asked for it. A mug with a hardware store on it. She set it on a folded towel on the floor instead of on the piano. Nobody does that unless they've lived with one. You still take it black. I'll take anything that's hot. That's not what I asked you. I said the bass strings were probably original and got busy with the mutes. She didn't hover either. She'd come in, put something down, notice one thing and go back out. Halfway through the treble, she stopped in the doorway. She said the F above middle C had been sour since before Ray died. She said nobody in that house had ever once mentioned it to her. I told her she was right about the note. I didn't say anything about the rest of it. I went out to the van, the long strip of felt. Bev was at her mailbox with a coat over her house dress at 4 in the afternoon. "That's a good thing you're doing," she said. I told her it was a job. Is Claire back in town, or is this just, and she didn't finish it, and she didn't need to? She meant it kindly. Not one person in this town has ever asked me that to be cruel. That is exactly what makes the question sit in you afterward. If somebody was doing it on purpose, you could at least be angry in a straight line. I went back in, worked another hour. I couldn't have told you afterward what I did in it. That's the trouble with a question like that. It doesn't need an answer to do the work. I needed the bench. Not to sit on, for the height. I wanted the middle by ear instead of by machine. So I lifted the lid. Hymnals, a spiral book of Christmas things with the cover gone. And underneath all of it, a page, folded in 3. Old paper, the soft kind they used to sell out of the racks at the music store on Front Street. Somebody had written on it in pencil, then somebody had folded it small enough to lose. She came in from the kitchen. She put the lid down. She didn't hurry it or snap it shut. She kept right on telling me about the storm windows and the man who was supposed to come look at the gutter in November. I didn't ask. What I got instead was the organ across the street. She has a theory. She will defend it in court. She plays flat on purpose. Nobody plays flat on purpose. She does it on the second verse. Every single week, you get the whole congregation dragging behind her, everybody looking at everybody else, and then it has to be cut short, and she is home by 20 after. It's the building. Radiators come on around 10, the pipes go sharp, then the room cools off through the service, and they come right back down. Same in every church in this county. She held her hand up at me like a crossing guard. She's been getting out of that second verse since before Ray died. I have watched her do it in July with the heat off. In July, the pipes go the other way. Then she's doing it on purpose in both directions, which is worse. I've tuned that organ twice, and both times it was the radiators. Elliot, I have had that woman figured out for 11 years. Don't you take her off me now. Then she laughed. One short one, with her hand flat on the top of the piano. It was the first laugh I'd heard out of her since the funeral home. I packed up at 5:30, told her Friday. She said Friday like a person confirming a delivery. I drove home and ate standing up over the sink. Wednesday I had a spinet in Davola. Roz, she's had me out the first week of March for 9 years, always with the storm door hooked until she's had a look at me first. "You're Claire's Elliot," she said, through the 2 inches of it. "Bev said you were over 4th Street. She'd had that ready. She had a dish towel over her shoulder. She never did unhook the door. Roz has known me since I did the church basement in Belpre. She isn't a mean woman. She was standing in her own doorway sorting me into a drawer, and the drawer had somebody else's name on the front of it. I told her the piano needed work. It was the only true thing I could think of that wasn't also an answer to what she'd asked, which was a different question than the one she said out loud. For 2 years I'd been taking that name for something awkward people say at the gas station. A nickname nobody checks with you before they hand it to you. Claire's Elliot. It comes with the town. Friday I brought the whole kit. I got into the block. I told her what 4 years of quiet to piano in a house like that. Nobody ran heat in that front room after Ray died. Nobody opened it up in the summer either. So the corner went swamp in August and cracker dry in January. 4 winters running. Wood moves when you do that to it. The soundboard loses its crown a little. The pins ease off in the block a little. The whole thing walks downhill a few cents at a time. Every part of it walks at a different speed. And there's nobody sitting in the room to hear the day it stops being one piano and starts being 200 separate arguments. Silence didn't preserve it. It just meant nobody caught it early. "So how long?" she said. 3 passes, a week apart at the least, probably 4. And I'm guessing at the base until I've had it apart. Weeks. Weeks. She looked out the window at the church a while. Then she said the house is nothing but quiet on a Sunday. Said it to the window and not to me the way you mentioned the weather. "I'll come Sunday." 9, she said. "I'm across the street at 11. She didn't write it down anywhere. I carried the kid out. I stood on the steps long enough for the cold to get through my shirt. Down 4th, right at Putnam. Then the river was on my left the whole way home, with the lights off the West Virginia side lying flat on it. Sundays at that house had a shape to them. Ray in the chair with the game on and the sound off. A pot roast that went in before church and came out at 2. Storm windows down the first Sunday in October, up the first Sunday in April. Ray hollering the measurements from the ground while I stood on the ladder, getting them wrong. He taught me to back a trailer. I could not back a trailer at 28 years old. He never once told anybody that. She kept a list on the side of the refrigerator, things that needed doing. My name was on it in her handwriting for 5 years running, in pencil, so it could be moved. I have thought about that list more than is reasonable for a piece of paper with a gutter written on it. 4 years ago, I carried one end of Ray's casket down those front steps. Then I stood in that kitchen, holding a dish towel for about 2 hours, because I didn't know where else a person was supposed to stand. Then Claire and I were done, and Sunday turned into a day with nothing in it. It wasn't dramatic. I'd get up on a Sunday, and there was no place I was expected. I was at the light before the bridge when Roz's number came up on the dash. She said she thought she'd hold off on the spinet a while, maybe get to it later in the year. Then she said something about her son coming through, and she thanked me twice. That's one more time than people thank you when they're telling you the truth. Roz has had that spinet tuned the first week of March for 9 years. Nobody in this town ever had to decide anything about me out loud. They only had to hear something and then be busy. Saturday I did a church basement in Belpre, then a spinet for a woman who talked through the whole job. Neither one took as long as it should have. Nothing came from 4th Street. There was no reason anything should have. We'd said 9, and 9 is a fact. I checked the phone anyway, about the way you go back and look at a stove you already know you turned off. At 10 that night, I loaded the pitch raise gear into the van, for a job I already knew I wasn't going to put on an invoice. Then I sat in the driveway with the door open and the engine off. A page, folded in 3, in a bench I'd had my hand on. A card for the Parkersburg shop in a drawer with the fuses. A gray car in front of a church for 2 hours on his day afternoon. None of it was mine to ask about. The only part I had any say over was whether I was standing on 4th Street at 9 o'clock in the morning. I sat out there long enough that the dome light gave up on its own. I was parked on 4th Street at 8:51. I sat in the van until 9 because 9 was what she said. A man who turns up early is asking for something. I've got no proof of that. I've believed it my whole life. The church lot across the street was empty at that hour. No gray car at the curb either. The door came open before I was up the steps. Coffee was already made and the pot was half down. 9 on a Sunday, which meant she'd been up since 7, with the house quiet around her. Her mug shelf is over the sink. 8 of them on hooks with the handles all turned the same way, because that's a woman who hangs mugs on purpose. The hardware store one was on the front hook now. Tuesday it had been in the back behind a church one. I didn't say a word about the shelf. The oven was on. You could smell it from the front room, roast and onion going soft underneath it. In before church, out at 2. 5 years of Sunday smelled like that, and neither one of us mentioned it. I got the lid off and started the first pass. A pitch raise isn't tuning exactly. You pull 200 and some strings up past where they belong on purpose, because the plate flexes when you load it and everything you set at the bottom sags again by the time you reach the top. So you overshoot. Then you come back in a week and do it closer. Then again. It's less a repair than talking somebody down off something. I got a third of the way up and I knew. 2 pins in the tenor brake turned easier than they had any business turning. Not slipping yet, easier. A pin block dries out from the inside over about 10 years, and there's no way to look at one and know. You find out with your hands 1 pin at a time. So the honest number was 4 passes, and a conversation I didn't want to have in March. I told her Tuesday's estimate still held, which was true enough to say standing up. She came in around 10 with a cup for herself and stood where she could see the street. Can you play any of it yet? Not so you'd want to be in the room. Play me something anyway. I don't play. Everybody says that. I've got a good ear and the hands of a man who fixes furnaces. She let it go. Then she set her cup on the runner and turned it a quarter around. There's a nocturne in that bench somewhere, the E-flat one. Chopin. Claire had it at 14 and quit in the middle of it. I had it at 17, and I never once got the turn in the 9th bar to come out even. She kept turning the cup. Nobody in this house ever played that piece right, and not one of us ever came close. Ray play? Ray couldn't find a note with both hands. He'd hum it at the sink and he'd hum it wrong, and I never corrected him, and I'd give a good deal now to hear him get it wrong again. The F that's been sour since before he died sits in the 2nd bar of that piece. She'd have been hearing it every time she thought about it for 4 years. I didn't tell her that either. She stayed in the doorway longer than she had on Tuesday. I set 2 mutes and said something about the tenor break. She asked if I'd eaten anything. The bass felt's original and ought to come out. That isn't an answer. No. Ray had a card in that kitchen drawer, I said. The two fellows over the river. I know what's in my own drawer. 12 miles. It's a bridge, honey, not the ocean. She took her cup back off the runner. Ask me a different question. I didn't have a different one. I had about 9 of them, and not one I could get out of my mouth. At 10:30, I went through the kitchen for the long strip of felt out of the van. The machine sits on the counter by the bread box, one of the old ones with a tape in it. Ray was going deaf his last 2 years, and she'd set the volume for him and never put it back down. The light was going. She hit the button on her way past with a dish in her hand. I don't believe she knew where I was standing. Mom, it's me. Bev told Aunt Eileen, and Aunt Eileen told me, so we can skip the part where you don't mention it. That piano has not needed tuning in 4 years, and you know it hasn't. I'm not going to sit up here in Columbus and watch you turn into a lonely woman with a project. And he doesn't know how to stop. He never did know how to stop coming to a house where nobody... She had the button down before the rest of it. Nobody on that tape, said stenographer. 40 years in a courtroom in Athens County taking down every word anybody said, and never once getting to air one of her own. Nobody said the woman who put 200 people through a funeral in 3 days and got every one of them fed. Nobody said the only person in this county who can hear an organist cheat a second verse. They call her Claire's mother. The bulletin called her Ray's widow. Her own daughter got 4 sentences into a message and reached for a word she'd have had to defend in front of anybody who ever sat at that table. The tape kept turning a second under her thumb. I lost 5 years of Sundays when the engagement ended. She'd been losing hers a good while before that, and nobody in this town noticed because there's no name for what she stopped being. She put the dish in the rack. She wiped a counter that didn't need it, and then she wiped it a second time. She calls Saturday nights, she said, after 10. I stood there with the felt in my hand. She knows what time I go to bed. She set it to the sink. Then she turned it around onto me, which is what people in that house do when a room gets close. What do you do with a Sunday now? I could have said I work. I do work some of them. I've got an alarm on my phone, 7:40. For what? I went and got the felt seated under the bass strings and came back for the cup I'd left on the floor. Took me the better part of 10 minutes. She hadn't moved off the counter. 7:40 was what it took, I said. Up, shower, coffee, out the door, across town here by 9. I said it the first spring Ray had me up on the storm windows. It's gone off every Sunday morning for 2 years and 4 months since the last time anybody wanted me at 9. You never turned it off. No. Why? It went off this morning while I was sitting in my own driveway with the engine running. An hour early. I shut it with my thumb the same as every other week. She didn't say anything kind about that, and I was grateful. You told me a thing once, I said, standing in that room. You said nobody ever hears a thing go out of tune. They just stop sitting in the room with it. I never said that. You did. She looked past me at the piano a while. Then I was right, she said, and I'd rather have been wrong. At 20 of 11, her sister Eileen came up the walk in a good coat. She saw the van first. I watched her see it. Then she saw me and her face did what a face does when it has already had the whole conversation about you in a car with somebody else. The stairs went up for a purse. 90 seconds is all a thing like that takes. Claire called me Thursday, her sister said. She was looking at the piano and not at me. She's worried sick, and I'll be honest with you, honey, I didn't tell her she was wrong to be. I said the pin block was soft on the bass side, and I'd know more in a week. You were always good about her. She got her gloves out of her coat pocket and worked one on. Don't take it hard. She's just filling a chair. She said it the way you'd tell a man the bank closes at 4. No heat in it anywhere. She'd have been mortified if you called it cruel, and she'd have been right to be, because she didn't mean it that way, and that is the whole trouble with it. A chair means somebody decided there's a chair. Which one? Who is allowed to sit in it? And whether the woman doing the filling ever gets told that's what she's doing. Her own sister stood in that hallway a minute and a half and never used her name once. She said twice, I counted, sitting in the van afterward. The stairs came back down and her sister's face turned over into something bright. They went across the street together, and from the sidewalk, the two of them looked like any other pair of women in this town on a Sunday. She left me in the house. Door on the latch, her coat gone off the hook, a stranger's front room that wasn't a stranger's. I worked an hour in it. The furnace came on twice. The organ started up over there right on the hour, and the second verse dragged exactly the way she says it drags. and I stood in the middle of her floor with a lever in my hand and laughed at nobody at all. She came back at 20 to 12. The calendar hangs inside the pantry door, a free one from the funeral home on Putnam, which stops being grim around the third year. Most of the squares were empty. Church twice, a dentist. She took the pen off its string. She wrote 9 in next Sunday's square, then the one after that, then the one after that. You didn't write it down last week. No, she said, I didn't. Her list on the refrigerator has had my name on it for 5 years in pencil, because a pencil can be moved. This was a pen. Then she turned the page over and wrote something on a Saturday 3 weeks out. I was near enough to watch her hand and not near enough to read it. What's that one? Something I've been putting off, she said, and hooked the pen back on its string. The next Sunday I carried a square of the good felt in before I carried the tool roll. She poured the coffee and went for the folded towel on the floor, same as always. I put the felt on the piano top and set the mug down on it and went back to the mutes. She stood there about 4 seconds. You don't miss much. You were already doing it, I just brought better felt. She started to say something about the last man who'd been out to the house and didn't get to the end of it, and went to see about the oven. She came back with a plate I hadn't asked for and set it on the bench lid. Eat that standing up if you have to. The treble's going to move on me while it sits. Then let it move. I ate it standing up. I needed the bench again for the height. I left the lid down. The second pass came up better than I'd told her it would. The tenor held all the way through the treble, and the 2 soft pins took their turn without complaining, which meant either I'd been wrong about the block or the weather had been kind for a week. Both of those are things a man says out loud. Only one of them is true. She got back from across the street at noon, and I was closing the lid on it. 2 more of these, I said. Then it holds by itself and you're shut of me. She had the coffee pot in her hand. She set it down on the burner without pouring anything into anything. Down the hall the oven fan was running. Nothing else in that house was. Don't finish it. I looked up. Leave me a reason. A widow with a kitchen calendar full of empty squares and a daughter who calls after 10 can mean a sentence like that one way, and she'd have every right to mean it. She was also standing near enough that I could see where she'd caught the back of her thumb on the oven rack, and she'd left a gap between the 2 halves of it that didn't need to be there. 3 words, then 4. Both of them were in that kitchen. I didn't ask her which one she meant. I never answered her. I picked the lever back up and set it on a pin I'd already turned that morning, and she let me have that and went to get the roast out. She didn't ask a second time. I don't believe that woman has asked any man twice in her life. I carried the kit down the steps at 12:15. Across the street they were still letting out, cars backing off the gravel in that slow Sunday way. A woman I'd never seen stopped on the sidewalk while I had the van doors open, church coat, hymnal in a zip bag. She looked at the house, then the van, then me. You with the Whitakers? I'm doing the piano. Oh, she said, are you family? I've had 2 years and 4 months to come up with something for that one. I told her it's a 1952 upright, and the bass strings are original. She said, well, isn't that something, and went on up the sidewalk toward Putnam. I sat in the van with the key in my hand. The phone lit up on the passenger seat. Roz out in Davila, who canceled a 9-year appointment in March and hadn't called me since. I let it ring out. It started again before the screen had gone dark. Nobody calls twice on a Sunday about a spinet. I let it ring out the second time too. She got me Tuesday at the light on Putnam. Roz talked about the spinet for a solid minute first. The pedal rod, her son's schedule, the damp in that back room. That is how a woman gets to a thing she has been carrying around. Nobody put me up to it, she said. I want that said before anything else. All right. I heard where you were working and I made up my own mind about it, and there's nobody to blame for that but me. Nobody told Roz a thing. She heard something on a Wednesday and did her own arithmetic, and there is no way to be angry at that in a straight line either. Then she got to the rest of it. She's been keeping count, honey. Bev had it off Eileen. 9 times out to that house since the first week of March, and only 3 of them ever showed up on a bill. The light went green, and I sat through it. I did the count myself in the van with the engine running. Tuesday, the first look. Friday, the block. Sunday, the Monday I drove back over for 2 mutes I keep a drawer full of at home. Wednesday, a storm window that had quit sticking by the time I got a hand on it. Thursday, the gutter man never came about. Saturday, a strip of felt that would have gone in an envelope. Sunday, and one more Tuesday I have never once been able to account for. 9. The Sundays were the part I'd have told anybody about. The days in between I never said out loud to a soul, including myself, and there they were in somebody else's mouth with a number on them. Nobody has ever taken a worried daughter seriously without a number in her hand, so she went and got one. She had it right. If you're the kind of person who stays through a story like this one, there are more of them on the channel. The next Sunday I put the third pass on it, and the tenor held where I'd left it, which is the first honest sign you get that a block intends to keep its word. She stood in the doorway with the pot and didn't pour anything. Eileen says you've been out here on weekdays. Some. Doing what? Whatever's next on the refrigerator. She set the pot down. Then she turned the cup a quarter around, which is what her hands do when she has already decided something. You didn't come back here for me. You came back for a Sunday. That's not fair. It might not be. I've had 4 years to get fair about things and I'm no good at it yet. She looked out at the church. You can have the Sundays. You can have me. I don't believe you know yet which one you've been driving across town for, and I'm not handing you both and letting you off ever finding out. I got 2 mutes seated and moved up into the treble. She let me have that, the same as she'd let me have the last one. At the door she said Saturday, 9, same as always. That's the one you wrote down in pen. That's the one I wrote down in pen. She didn't say what it was. Saturday morning there were 4 flat boxes leaning on the porch rail, and a roll of garbage bags on the top step. She had the closet open in the back bedroom before I was up the stairs. Ray's good coat, his work coat, the tan one he wore to everything that fell in between. 3 piles going on the bed, sorted by her, by hand, before anybody else in that house was awake. Truck comes at 11, she said. I need the wardrobe out of that corner, and I'm not doing that part on my own. Her sister got there at 9:30, with the face she'd put on in the car. The gray sedan came up 4th at 10 and parked at the curb in front of the church. Same curb. The same spot it had sat in on a Tuesday afternoon in March while I worked 20 feet off and never went to the window. It idled there 4 or 5 minutes with somebody in it. Then the door came open. Bev was at her mailbox before Claire made the walk. Whatever she'd started asking me a month ago and never finished, she had the back half of it now, in a coat she'd have bought in Columbus. Somebody in this town had picked up a phone. That's what I had in my head going down those stairs. Somebody had told her he's out there on a Saturday now, and she'd got in a car. She came in the back way, the way you do in a house you learn to walk in. Mom. There's coffee. Auntie Lean, then me, Elliot. Claire. 2 years and 4 months, and that was the whole of it. She went through to the front room first. The lid was up, the tool roll open on the floor, my mug sitting on a square of good felt on the piano top, where she'd have known her mother never let anybody put one. She came back in and gave it to me straight, with no heat in it anywhere, which is how I knew she'd been building it in the car since Lancaster. You didn't fall in love with my mother. You fell in love with my family. You just couldn't tell the difference. She wasn't wrong. I'd have had to stand in a dead man's bedroom and lie to say otherwise. I lost Claire and I lost a chair at a table, a ladder in October, a man hollering measurements up at me off the grass. I'd never been able to pull those apart because nobody made me hold still long enough to try. What she couldn't see from where she was standing is that she had just described her own mother and thought she was describing me. A woman gets folded into a family the same way. Ray's wife, then Claire's mother, and then Ray is gone and Claire is in Columbus and the folding comes undone, and there is nobody left in the room who knows what was underneath it. I lost 5 years of Sundays. She'd been losing hers a long while before I ever came around. She's desperate. Claire said it with her mother 4 feet away at the sink. I'm sorry, Mom, but you are. Look at what this has turned into. The woman at that sink had been up since 7. She had taken a dead man's clothes off a rod 1 hanger at a time and put the good coat in the keep pile, then put it in again. She had picked the day herself and written it in pen 3 weeks ahead so she couldn't move it on herself. She'd made the calls and she'd made the coffee. 40 years of taking down other people's words, and now she stood in her own kitchen listening to herself get discussed in the third person. I set the bag down. Nobody in this house has said her name in 4 years. I said it at the room. Eileen was in it and so was I. Her own sister told me she's filling a chair. Every person on this street calls her Claire's mother. She's been standing in the middle of all of it since the funeral, and not one of us has ever once said the word out loud. Elliot. I stopped. Don't do that in my kitchen. She still had the bag in her hand, and she didn't set it down. I can talk. I've been able to talk the entire time. You're right. I know I am. So I stood down. Claire went through to the front room. I don't think she went for the piano so much as for the only room in that house with nobody in it. Then the bench lid came up. You can hear that hinge from the kitchen. It has been announcing itself since 1952. By the time I got to the doorway, she had the hymnals out on the floor and the page open in both hands. Old soft paper folded in 3. The nocturne, the E-flat one, and over the 9th bar, in pencil in my own hand, somebody had numbered the fingers through the turn. I wrote that. One Sunday in the fall, 5 years back, with the game on in the next room with the sound off and everybody in front of it asleep. She'd got stuck in the same place she'd been stuck at 17. I can't play a note of it, but I can count fingers, and I can hear it when a hand runs out of them. It took about 20 minutes. I had not thought about that night one time since. She had. She'd folded it in 3 and put it under the hymnals. In a bench she doesn't open, in a room she doesn't sit in, where she could put a hand on it in the dark. Claire held it up by the corner. This isn't March. No. This is years. She looked at her mother in the doorway. Mom, this is years. She had the arithmetic right and the sum wrong. Nothing happened in that room 5 years ago, except a man counting fingers for a woman who'd been losing that turn since she was 17. And it was still years, years of something. Nobody in that family ever had a word for, in rooms Claire was not in, and she had just found the receipt for it under her own hymnals. She folded it back along its own creases, which is what you do with a thing you intend to keep hold of. Finish the piano, she said. Take the money for it, then go home. Everybody was in that front room by then. Eileen in the hall with the bag still in her fist, her mother in the doorway with her coat half on for the truck. I'd owed her an answer since a Sunday at noon 2 weeks back and had never put it in the air. A room with 4 people in it seemed like a poor place to start. I started anyway. I won't finish. I didn't say it to Claire. I said it to the woman in the doorway with her coat half on, in front of her sister and her daughter and an open piano. Say that again in October, Claire said. Her mother pulled the coat the rest of the way on. Then she went past all 3 of us and opened the front door and stood there holding it. Outside. The storm door banged behind the 4 of us. It was about 40 degrees on that porch with the wind coming up 4th off the river, and next door Bev's door shut 2 seconds after ours did. She looked at the paper in her daughter's hand. Put that back where you found it. Claire went in. Through the front window I watched her stop at the piano. She didn't put it back, she opened it out flat on the music desk and stood it against the rail the way you set a thing up for somebody who is going to sit down to it. Then she came out with her keys and never said a word about it. I got one line up. She asked me here on a Saturday because... Elliot. That was my share of it. I called you, she said to Claire, the day I wrote it on that calendar. I asked you to come help me take your father's coats off a rod because I couldn't do it by myself, and you said yes, and then you drove down early and sat in front of that church for half an hour before you'd come in. Second time you've sat out there in that car. I didn't know what I was walking into. You knew. I told you on the phone what Saturday was. You wanted to see it first. Then she turned to her sister. You told him I was filling a chair. Honey, I never meant it the way he's. I know you didn't. That's the part I can't do a thing with. Her hands went in her coat pockets and stayed there. There isn't a chair. There's a house with the heat off in the front room and a woman still living in it, and every one of you settled a long time ago that the most that was ever going to be is somebody's mother with company over. Nobody helped her out. A woman stopped him on that sidewalk a couple Sundays back and asked him if he was family. He stood there and told her about the bass strings, because there is no answer to that, because not one of us ever gave him one. She looked at Claire when she said the next part. He carried your father down these steps. He put the storm windows up and down at this house for 5 years, and nobody thanked him for it in front of anybody. Then she said the last of it to the street. I said a thing in that front room the spring your dad got his diagnosis, about how nobody ever hears a thing go out of tune, they just quit sitting in the room with it. There were 4 of us in there. Her sister was looking down at the porch boards. Every one of you took it for a remark about the piano. I wasn't talking about the piano. Claire had the keys in her hand the whole time. She got about 10 seconds of quiet and then she used it. "I'm sorry if I hurt you. I'm not sorry I came." Somebody had to say it out loud, and there was nobody else in this family who was ever going to. "All right," her mother said. That was all of it. Nobody made that girl stand there and do it again better. The truck came at 10 past 11. Two young fellows, half a minute a load. Ray's good coat went out the front door in a bag with a knot in the top, and not one of us watched it go. Claire left before noon. She stopped at the bottom of the walk and looked back up at me like she had one more in her, then got in the car and went. Eileen stayed till 1 and talked about her knee. I was putting the tool roll in the van at 4 when she came down the steps without a coat on. "You can take it back tonight," she said. "People say things in a kitchen. I've never held one against anybody yet, and I'm too old to start." I didn't have anything. "I know what you said in there, and I know who was standing in the room when you said it. Sleep on it. If you're not on this street at 9 tomorrow, I won't call, and I won't ask anybody why." Then she went back up, and the storm door caught behind her. I sat in that van on 4th with the key in my hand until the front room went dark. 17 hours to 9 o'clock, and every one of them was mine to change my mind in. I was on 4th Street at 9 o'clock. The van stayed where I parked it. I went up the steps with the tool roll and knocked, which I had never once done at that house. The door had always come open before I got there. It came open before I got there. She had her coat on already. Church at 11, same as every week of her life. I set the roll down on the kitchen floor and left it there. I've got a thing I'd rather say standing up. Then, say. Before you ever called me in March, I'd been driving past this house on Sundays. She didn't move off the table. Down 4th, right at Putnam, past the church, back around. Takes about 40 seconds if the light's with you. Better than half the Sundays in 2 years and 4 months. I never slowed down and I never stopped. I'd have told you I was headed to the hardware store. The furnace came on and ran and quit again. There's a Tuesday in that count of hers I couldn't account for. I know what it was. Roz out in Davola had put the Cispanate off for the year, and I had a Tuesday with nothing in it. I drove straight over here and sat at that curb 20 minutes with the engine off, and then I went home. I made myself finish it. There's a name for sitting in a car outside this house, and it belongs to your daughter. She had the keys in her hand the whole way through. "Yes," she said. That was all of it. She didn't tell me it was all right, and she didn't tell me it wasn't. She let me stand in it. Then she put the keys down and turned the morning somewhere else. I let her, because it was hers to turn. "You asked me about Ray's card. You told me to ask you a different question. I called that number the November after he died. A man said they booked 6 weeks out, and did I want to leave my name?" She turned one of the keys over with her thumb. I said no thank you. I put the card back in the drawer with the fuses and stood in this kitchen a good while. "You could have had it done by Christmas." I could have had it done by Christmas 4 years running. She worked a glove on. I didn't want a piano tuned. I wanted somebody in this house who knew where the fuse box was. She got the door open with her elbow. "Last Sunday I told you I wasn't handing you the Sundays and me both until you knew which one you'd been driving across town for. You just stood in my kitchen and told me you were driving across town before I ever picked up a phone. That'll do. Don't improve on it." I didn't. She was across the street by 5 of 11. I put the 4th pass on it in an empty house with the organ going through the wall. She got back at noon and I had the lid halfway down. "Leave it up." I left it up and went back to the mutes. Nobody had put a hand on those keys in 4 years. I'd had that instrument in pieces on her front room floor since the first week of March. Every note that ever came out of it in that time, I made myself, with a lever. She got the roast out at 2 and set 2 plates without asking whether I was staying. We got about halfway through it. "You've been carrying that thing," I said, "around like a hot dish." "Which thing?" "Don't." I put the fork down. "A woman my age doesn't get to just call somebody," she said. "There has to be a reason, the gutter, a storm window, a limb over the garage. Ray died, and every reason I had went in the ground with him. There's the phone. There's the phone." She said it back to me flat. "It quits by inches, a month between, then 2, and then you're the one doing all the calling. There's a limit on how long a woman keeps that up." So there was one thing left wrong in this house. And a man in my front room fixing it. 3 weeks and it's fixed. Then there's not one thing wrong here at all, and I'm a woman with a nice quiet house and nothing on God's earth to call anybody about. That was what she meant in March. I wanted a reason to be allowed to pick up a phone, she said. That's the whole of it. It's smaller than you've been making it, and I'd like it back at its own size. She left the gap in it again. She'd left the same gap in this same kitchen 2 weeks earlier with the oven fan running. Both halves were on that table, and she handed me the one. I've decided since that she does it on purpose. It's what her hands do. I didn't ask her which one she meant. I don't know that I ever will. I've got 3 I should have asked you on that porch. The day you brought the ring back. Yes. Ask them. Did you want me to stop coming by? No. Was I allowed to call you? You were allowed the entire time. Nobody ever told you so, and I'm the one in this family who should have. The third one I'd carried longer than the other 2. What was I supposed to do with 5 years of Sundays? She took a while over that one. They were yours, she said. You were in them. There's nobody gets to come back through and take them off you. It took her about 9 seconds. Claire came down the first Sunday in May. She parked in front of the church in the same spot as the other 2 times. She was out of the car inside a minute. I was in the front room with a mute in my hand. The 2 of them were in the kitchen with the door open. I heard the whole thing through a doorway, which is not something I'm proud of, and is also exactly what happened. I read that page wrong. You did. I've had it in my head a week, and I'd rather have that out of the way first. Water ran and shut off. I called Bev about you. I called Annalene twice in 1 week to ask how you were. A chair moved. I never once called you and asked you. No. I stood in your kitchen and talked about you in the third person with you 4 feet off at the sink. I'd have taken a strip off anybody who did that to me. Then she said the thing she'd driven 2 hours down to say. I'm sorry about the 4 years. The Saturday I'd do again. I believe you. You don't have to. I spent 40 years taking down what people say. I know what it sounds like when somebody means it. Then her mother set her terms, the way she writes on a calendar. You come down any Saturday there is. That door has never been locked to you, and it isn't now. Sunday mornings I've got something, and I won't discuss it with you, and I won't fight with you over it. Mom, I'm not putting my own child out of this house, and I've never slammed a door in my life. I've just gone around and turned 2 or 3 locks, quiet, the way a person does at night. I'd rather you heard about them from me than found one. About 10 seconds of nothing. All right. There's coffee. Claire stayed 2 hours. They got a pot of coffee down between them, and one of them said something about the pantry shelves and the other one let it go by. She was gone before 1. She's been back twice since. One of those went badly enough that I put my tools in the van and drove home. A town like this takes a season to change its mind about anybody. It goes soft at the edges first, and one day you notice it's been carrying less than you thought. Bev finished her question in June. She'd had the front half of it out at a mailbox in March. She stood there in a house dress at 4 in the afternoon and got the back half out at last. I told her yes. She said well, and went in with her mail. Roz called about the spinet the last week of May, and booked it for July and never said a word about March. I'll take it. Eileen comes on Thursdays now. She got 4 words into she one afternoon at that kitchen table, then put it down and picked up something about her knee instead. She never did finish the sentence. It's the most anybody in that family managed all spring. The Sunday standing held. 9 o'clock straight through the apology and out the other side. There was a Sunday at the end of May when it came near to being something else. I was on my knees with the bottom board off. She came in for the mug and left it where it sat. She stood with her hand flat on the top of that piano about a foot off my shoulder for as long as it takes a furnace to kick on. I got up and went out to the van for a strip of felt I did not need. At 9:10 that night, the phone went off on the arm of my chair. I wanted you to. I sat with that a while. I know, that's why I didn't. Then the rest of it, because the first part on its own was a nice thing to say and about half true. Back in April you told me you weren't handing me the Sundays, and you both until I knew which one I'd been coming across town for. If I'd done that this morning, you'd never have found out which. You'd have spent 4 years wondering. She didn't answer until the morning. All right, 9. The first Sunday in June I put the 5th pass on it, and I was rolling up the tools when she sat down on the bench. She had not sat on that bench with the lid up in 4 years. The page was still standing against the rail where her daughter set it in April, My own pencil over the 9th bar out in the open on that music desk for 6 weeks. Neither one of us had said a word about it. She put her hands on the keys. Then she played the E-flat one, and she played it badly. The left hand rushed the back half of every bar. She held the pedal through the change, and the whole low end went to mud. She came through the 2nd bar, and the F above middle C rang out true under her thumb. That note had been wrong in that room since before her husband died. She went past it without a blink. Then the turn in the 9th bar came up and she wrecked it. She went back 4 bars and came at it again. Wrecked it in the same place, the 4th finger a hair late. She'd been wrecking it that way since she was 17 years old, in a house where nobody ever played that piece right, and not one of them ever came close. She looked down at the page twice, both times after. The 3rd run she went on past it anyway and finished it out. I stood in that doorway, with a felt mute in my hand, and heard every fault in it. I said nothing at all. Her hands stayed where they were. Nadine. She didn't turn around. Say that again. Nadine. Ray was the last one. She was looking at the 9th bar. He'd holler it up the stairs when he couldn't find a thing that was in his own hand. 7 years I'd known that woman. I'd sat at her table most Sundays for 5 of them. I carried her husband down her own front steps. I had never once said it to her face, and neither had one other soul on that street. She sat there a while. Then she had another run at the 9th bar and wrecked it again. I'd been putting a conversation off since March. I had it in June, in her kitchen, over a coffee going cold. The block was soft on the tenor side and there is no fixing that with a lever. Then finish it, she said. I've got other reasons to call you now. So I took those 3 words back in June and she never made me say so out loud. Oversized pins through the tenor break. 200 and some strings down and back up again. The plate flexed the way a plate does and I chased it through July. A pass a week, then every other week. In July I tuned the organ across the street. I sat in that church on a Sunday in 90 degrees, with the radiators stone cold, and listened to that woman flatten the whole 2nd verse. I told her about it that evening on the porch. She was decent about it for around 10 minutes. By the first Sunday in August it held where I put it. I struck the A above middle C on a Tuesday and came back Friday and struck it again. It hadn't moved a hair. That's finished. On an old upright, that is the whole of what the word means. The page is still on the music desk. I did the 9th bar over in August, for her hand instead of mine, in pencil off the side of her refrigerator. My name went back on that list in May. Gutter storm windows, the shelf in the pantry, Elliot. In pen. The storm windows go down the first Sunday in October. It's already in the square, and nobody had to ask me. She still can't get that turn to come out even. I still can't play a note of it. 9 o'clock most Sundays, the 2 of us are in that front room being no good at the same piece of music. Maybe you got folded into a family that was never yours on paper, and one day the door quit opening and nobody ever told you why. Have you ever experienced something similar? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.